Hey all, it's your girl Erin, and so today I wanted to talk a little bit more about gender and gender identity. So I got some feedback on the last video. Thanks for your comments. Also, if you ever want me to go more into any topic, just like comment some questions in it and stuff. I'll It helps me to know what people are interested in. But yeah, the link between gender and gender identity. So I've been thinking about it a bit, and I sort of came to the conclusion that it works the same way that normal words work when it comes to language. For example, you know, you have different dialects in different places. So you could say a word where you live now, and everyone around you will think it means one thing. Then you could go somewhere else, say that same word, and it could mean something totally different. So, like, if we look at the word gift in English, the same spelling is a word in German for poison. So, it could be totally opposite. And so, that's kind of like how we were saying with gender identity is in different places or times, a gender might be completely opposite. Well, you know, that maps nicely onto the way we use words and stuff. So, that informs a few things. For example, you can assume that in whatever culture you're in, that the whatever gender identity, uh, what people think of when they hear that gender identity in that culture, that's probably going to be what people think of if you say like I'm that gender, what they're used to. But that doesn't mean that people um, have to change as, as they change, even if it's completely opposite. Um, you should still have the agency and the self determination to say I'm this gender. You know, so let's say you were a time traveler and you were a woman in the 21st century and you teleported back 400 years, and everyone there was like, whoa, this is totally a man, and in their culture, everything you were doing was manly. Well, because I think everyone needs to have agency and self determination, you would still be able to say, no, I'm a woman. And so I think that's the first important thing that we agree on is that people get to choose and we don't get to say that they chose wrong. Even if they are the only one who makes that choice, it's still valid for them. And we need to have a big enough picture of gender that makes sense. um, so yes, when it comes to gender identity, your origin does matter in some ways, because when you are in a different culture, people are going to perceive you and are going to think of your identity as including the fact, or if they know, the fact that you are from another place. And so they won't just think, wow, the person says they're gender X, they will think that person's gender X from Y. And and so that will give it almost like a unique identifier, how, a different word, so to speak, which will help them with having different definitions. But let's say that they didn't do that. They thought that you were someone from their locality, and yet you were displaying the opposite behavior uh, of what they expected from the gender identity you give them. Well, you know, I think what we need to do as a society basically is to expand our conceptions of an identity when we come across unfamiliar instances of it. So if we do come across someone who acts completely opposite, we have to have a big enough uh, conception of gender to say that those two opposites can exist in the same umbrella. Um, and that might be difficult to do, but it's not something that's impossible. It's only difficult because we don't, almost because we don't want to, in a way. Um, so I think that's a good way where self-determination can meet the complexity, is that we need to understand that there will be an assumption, um, for now at least. Who knows if we will still think that way in the future? But because of the way society is and the way we all were raised, there is an assumption that gets made when it comes to your gender. And we need to be real about that. And then understand that, you know, a person's locality will have informed them to some degree, but that their self-determination should be the primary determining factor in what we say a person's gender is. I did write some notes. Yeah. So yeah, we need to be big enough to be like, um, whatever someone identifies as is valid, and expand the umbrellas to fit, everyone that self-identifies. Uh, so, but now on the topic of self-determination, agency, then we have to ask the question: well, are there any gender identities that are inherently problematic? So, are there identities that people shouldn't use? Um, and well, first of all, I think it's important that people are honest. And so, if someone does have a sort of problematic gender identity, I'm not saying that they need to lie about it and stop using that. Um, but it would suggest that perhaps the they need to do some work, that their framework for gender is not big enough, to handle the way it is in society, and that they need to maybe learn a little bit to get their framework better, and that they can understand that. But I'm not saying that they should feel bad about it. Like, as I was saying, we were raised in such a way that we never had to do that. And now, asking people to start learning a new thing is always going to be hard for them. And that includes, if you do have a problematic identity, learning why it's problematic, and then learning what would be better. Because I think there's a better fit for you than the problematic thing that you might think is your best fit. Because I honestly believe that everybody has their optimal existence, like your best self, your final form, the true you, who you were meant to be. I think everybody, when you ask that question, the answer is someone who doesn't harm others. I think that is the optimal state for every single person, and that's something that we hold in common, is that nobody is better just because they are violent towards others. It doesn't make you better. It might manipulate the material conditions around you, but it doesn't make you any more important or real or whatever in the bigger scheme of things. And so I would look at an example of like white supremacy. So I think to some degree every white person is a white supremacist without trying, like by accident, because they were raised to have certain assumptions regarding privilege that, they were too young when they were taught to be able to think critically about the things they were being taught. And so they were taught some nonsense when they were too young to know better. And how do you really tell if you've gotten all of that out you? I think if you say that you have, then wouldn't really trust that, because from my own personal experience, as hard as you try, sometimes you just discover new crap that was pushed on you. So, but um, white people should be trying to dismantle white supremacy, and you can talk about how whiteness itself isn't actually a race, but that's something that we can talk about another time. But I think there's a difference between the white people who are actively white supremacists, who are like, um, going out there and trying to act in ways that will further push down people of color and further elevate whiteness, and who are constantly like putting out propaganda or whatever, includes what memes you retweet, etc. And then you get people who are sort of against white supremacy in theory, but who are by accident doing things that are in line with it. And so the people who are active, like, they should be honest, and they should be identifying as white supremacists. But it is still a very problematic identity. And it's not problematic in the sense that the word exists being problematic or that anyone uses it. The thing that's problematic is the identity behind it, the actual belief system and ideology behind it. That's the real issue with it. And that's why someone who is an active white supremacist is someone who has examined that and been like, yeah, looks good to me. Where someone who is an accidental white supremacist may not even have looked at that, and they are just sort of going with the flow, and when everyone around them is like, that's cool, they go, that's cool, and they don't realize maybe even the full extent of it, or why they shouldn't be doing that. And that isn't to say that there's an excuse, and I think if you segregate yourself from other types of people, you're more likely to fall prey to those problematic ways of thinking. So it is also your fault if you end up there, because you didn't properly immerse yourself in experiences with people that would challenge your views. But anyway, I would say it is problematic for people to identify as white supremacists, and that we shouldn't feel bad about calling people out who do, for their beliefs and for the fact that they are being proud about it. So when it comes to gender, is there something similar where identifying as that gender implies a harmful ideology? And I would suggest yes, and that I would say would be identifying as binary. But that isn't actually what the video is about today. I just wanted to throw that out there, and we can do a video on that as well if there's interest. But I wanted to talk more about the separation of dysphorias today, so I'm going to move on to that. So because we're raised in a society where we're sort of trained to think that it's vitally important that you have an answer to what gender is that person, based on their appearance. So that for some reason that society wants us to be very good at, maybe it's so we use the right pronouns, but like why is our society built around correctly assuming gender, like that you're expected to address someone with the right pronouns without asking them first? Why is society like that? It doesn't make sense. But because we're raised in a society like that, we're sort of trained to always be trying to answer that question. What gender is that person? What gender is that person? like it shouldn't really matter. I mean, it matters in the sense that if it's important to the person and you want to get to know the person, then that's going to be an important thing to learn.